How to build a mind so strong it terrifies people, your mind, their fear. What happens when you truly begin to change, not just externally, but from within? The world reacts often, not with support, but with silence, resistance, unease. In this video, we explore the hidden psychological cost of awakening and why authentic transformation threatens comfort zones, yours and theirs. Drawing from Nietzsche's philosophy and Jungian insight, we reveal how personal evolution disturbs mediocrity, disrupts social expectations, and invites solitude not as punishment, but as a sacred initiation. You'll discover why rejection is often a reflection of others' discomfort, not your failure, and why suffering can be the beginning of true inner power. If you've ever felt misunderstood, judged, or alone on the path of awakening, this video is for you, because the deeper you go, the more you realize you're not losing connection, you're touching something most are afraid to feel. Your transformation is not rebellion, it's truth, rising. When you truly change, the world around you starts to feel uneasy. There's a strange thing that almost everyone notices when they genuinely start to change. It's not a feeling of exhilaration, nor is it admiration from others. It's silence, hesitation, a vague sense of distance. And sometimes it comes in the form of seemingly harmless jokes or concerned advice laced with subtle undertones. The world no longer responds to you the way it used to because, deep down, your true change has begun to disturb something familiar, their comfort zone. You don't have to say anything. You don't need to prove anything. Just thinking differently, acting differently, questioning what you used to accept, that alone is enough to make people uncomfortable. Not because you're wrong, but because they're not ready to change with you. This can confuse you. You might feel misunderstood, isolated, as though you've just lost a part of your connection with the world you once knew. But understand this is a sign, one of the clearest signs that you're on the right path. When your mind begins to expand, you'll inevitably confront not only yourself, but the system of people around you. Inner evolution always makes the old world uneasy, because you become a mirror reflecting what others have long denied: stagnation, numbness, repetition. And no one wants to be forced to look at that. Your change is a reminder that they may have been living in a way that no longer fits. It makes them uncomfortable, not because of you, but because of themselves. But you're not a disruptor. You're opening a door, a possibility, a path. And their discomfort may actually be the first tremor of awakening, one they haven't dared to name. So if you find yourself feeling out of place in the midst of transformation, don't turn back. The silence surrounding you may not be rejection. It may be confusion, as they witness, for the first time, someone who truly dares to live differently. When you begin to awaken, you make mediocrity feel threatened. You don't have to shout. You don't have to argue. You don't have to prove anything. Simply living differently is enough to shake the foundation of outdated norms. And that's not a coincidence, because a truly awakened mind always makes mediocrity feel threatened. Society loves stability, and stability is often maintained through repetition, through people who are predictable, easy to manage, easily satisfied. When you no longer fit that mold, when you refuse to live by pre-written rhythms, you become an unknown, an anomaly, a risk to the established order. And mediocrity's first response is not understanding, it's defense. You'll hear vague criticism, sense growing distance. Notice attempts to pull you back to your original place. This isn't hatred. It's fear of having to question long-held beliefs, fear of looking inward and realizing they've lived a limited life without knowing it. Friedrich Nietzsche understood this. Well, he once said that a strong mind doesn't just change itself, it unintentionally reveals the weakness of minds still ruled by habit, not because it attacks, but because it simply exists. And that existence alone reflects everything others are trying to hide. That's why. The more awakened you become, the less welcomed you are in old spaces. Because you no longer play the role, you no longer comply, you no longer uphold the silent contracts everyone agreed to. And when one person breaks the pattern, mediocrity reacts as if it's under threat. But that's not your fault. Every act of awakening, no matter how quiet, is like a drop of water falling onto the still surface of a collective. It causes ripples, and those ripples stir others. They may resist at first, but somewhere within, a part of them begins to wake. So if you're seen as strange, if you make others uncomfortable, remember, it's not because you're harmful, it's because you've become too real, too free, too untamed. And that alone raises a question mediocrity never wants to hear. Am I alive? Or just going through the motions? You're not isolated. You're entering a depth few dare to touch. One of the most visceral experiences on the path of true transformation is loneliness. Not surface level loneliness, not the lack of someone to talk to or listen to you, but a deeper solitude, the kind that arises when you begin to see the world through new eyes, while the world still sees you through the old ones. You realize that what used to excite you now feels empty. Conversations that once comforted you now feel repetitive. Shallow relationships that once felt close now feel distant, not because of conflict, but because you've entered a deeper level of awareness, a space few are willing to explore. And in that space, silence thickens. Not everyone will understand what you think or feel. Not everyone will accept the person you're becoming. But know this is not isolation. It's transformation. Nietzsche once noted, those who begin the awakening journey feel lost, not because they've strayed off course, but because they've gone ahead, and the path of going ahead is always a solitary one. When you shed what's inauthentic, the masks, the expectations, the roles you once mistook for identity, there will, of course, be emptiness. But that emptiness isn't a loss. It's a space, a clearing, a place where truth can finally begin to grow. And truth, as we know, never arrives in a crowd. In that place, you'll feel torn. There will be moments you want to go back. Pretend again, moments where misunderstanding and judgment exhaust you, but in those exact moments, you're drilling into the core of your being. You're learning to stay with truth, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it makes you feel alone. And there, you'll discover something beautiful. Loneliness is no longer frightening. It becomes the birthplace of wholeness. You're not disconnected. You're withdrawing from false belonging to enter into real connection with yourself. That is a space few dare to enter, but it's the only space that can heal you at your roots. And once you touch that depth, you'll no longer need many words to understand someone. You'll no longer need noise to hear life. You'll begin to feel the loneliness in others, and that is where true compassion begins. Suffering is not the enemy. It's the gateway to power. We're often taught that a good life is one with little pain, few failures, minimal disruption. But Nietzsche didn't believe that to him. Suffering was the fertile ground from which humans grow, where the mind strengthens and the spirit becomes unshakable. And he didn't say this with romanticism. Nietzsche didn't glorify pain out of pessimism. He spoke as someone who had walked through the dark, stared into the abyss, and witnessed himself being reborn from it. He understood that moments of disorientation, disintegration, and inner chaos are precisely where we rebuild ourselves from the deepest foundation. His famous quote, "You must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star," is not just poetic, it's a profound psychological diagnosis. A person who has never been torn apart by life can never understand the value of wholeness. A mind that's never cracked open can never be truly strong, and a heart that hasn't suffered can never love with true empathy. So if you're in a painful season, pause. Don't label it wrong. Don't rush to escape. Look into it. As Nietzsche did, not to endure, but to listen to what within you is trying to be born. Suffering doesn't come to crush you. It comes to show you where you've lived too long in inauthenticity. You may have believed that strength comes when life gets easier, but if you look closely, every major turning point in your life followed a collapse. No one becomes brave without once being afraid. No one becomes strong without first being vulnerable. And no one truly lives without once wanting to give up. So instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" ask, "What will I do with this?" Nietzsche believed that within pain lies untapped potential buried beneath the illusion of stability. And if you can walk through suffering without losing your compassion, without freezing your heart, without turning bitter, you'll emerge not just a survivor, but a reborn soul with a mind no storm can bend. When there's no God left to believe in, you're forced to birth a universe within truth. Doesn't always arrive like a flash of liberation. Sometimes it comes as a shock, a collapse, an emptiness that chills you to the bone. Friedrich Nietzsche called this the death of God, a declaration that shook the very foundations of Western philosophy. But he didn't say it to reject religion. He said it to point out something even more profound. Faith had died. And with it, every illusion that someone out there was charting a safe path for you. When Nietzsche declared, God is dead, he wasn't celebrating. He was warning, because without a supreme power to guide life, responsibility no longer belongs to anyone else. It falls squarely on you. There's no one left to lean on, no divine will, to cling to, no destiny to blame now. You are the one who must write the meaning of your life. This is the first true earthquake of awakening. When you step away from inherited beliefs, when you stop living by externally imposed truths, you'll find yourself standing in a vast, empty space, void, unclear, no signposts, no pre-made path, only radical freedom. And that kind of freedom is terrifying. Many collapse at this point. They panic, retreat to old beliefs, cling to old rules just to avoid the feeling of being abandoned by the universe. But Nietzsche didn't take that path. He walked straight into the void. If there is no inherent meaning, we must create it. And to do that, we can't live by habits, reflexes, or the need to be accepted. We must birth something from within a personal universe that only we can feel, shape, and follow. This is not an easy lesson. It demands that you surrender the role of the victim. You can no longer blame fate. You can no longer wait for someone to save you. You must stand up, alone, and ask, if no one else decides my life, then what will I choose to live for? That is the first step toward building a mind that cannot be broken. A mind that no longer relies on borrowed structures, but becomes a structure itself, creating value, definition, and meaning on its own terms without a God. There are no limits, but also no excuses for running from the truth of who you are and where you dare to stand in that void. A new self is born from within you. Freedom doesn't come from the world. It comes when you stop waiting to be rescued. We often confuse freedom with comfort. We think that when no one controls us, when social pressure disappears, when we're allowed to do what we want, that's freedom. But for Nietzsche, freedom isn't that simple. True freedom doesn't begin when you're freed from the outside. It begins when you stop waiting for that freedom. The truth is, many people still live like children left alone in a vast world. They wait for someone to lead them, a teacher, a religion, a philosophy, a lover. They don't realize that the very act of waiting steals their greatest freedom, the ability to choose the meaning of their own lives. Nietzsche called this brutal freedom, not because it harms, but because it leaves no one else to blame. When there's no scapegoat, no savior, no victim role to hide behind you, begin to touch a power that no system can control, your will. And that is the turning point when you stop asking, who will save me? And start asking, what can I do with myself? You are no longer passive in life. You become a creator, a builder, someone who doesn't just survive, but transforms, leads, and alters the course of their own path. True freedom is not a release from responsibility. It is the courage to carry all of it. From there, you no longer need an easier world. You need a stronger mind, one that cannot be subdued, manipulated, or driven by fear. And when you stop waiting for someone to rescue you, you'll realize you were the one you were waiting for all along. Übermensch, a symbol of the soul beyond all limits, Nietzsche did not create the image of the Übermensch, or overman, as someone physically powerful or a cinematic hero. Übermensch is a symbol of a person who has risen above dependence on external moral systems, transcended the need for approval, and no longer lives as a follower of the herd. This person does not live by other people's rules of right and wrong. They don't wait for society's recognition. They don't shrink themselves to fit moral standards built on fear and weakness. They create their own values rooted in personal experience, inner truth, and a rejection of illusion. The Übermensch doesn't ask, "Am I allowed to do this?" They ask, "Does this honor who I truly am?" And that question alone redefines their entire way of being. Unbound by convention, the Übermensch lives with a profound drive Nietzsche called the will to power, not to dominate others, but to master the self. It's a power you don't always see, but you feel it in their calm, in the stillness of their gaze, in how they stand alone without resistance or need for approval. What makes the Übermensch special isn't superpowers. It's superconsciousness, a mind that refuses manipulation, a spirit that doesn't accept false security. They may be misunderstood, isolated, even feared, but they do not shrink. They do not belong anywhere because they create their own space. In a world where most live to be accepted, the Übermensch lives to be authentic. That's what makes them rare, and their existence becomes a symbol, not of external power, but of an internal sovereignty no one can own or tame. If you want rebirth, you must let the old self fall apart. No one can step into a new life while still clinging to the old self. True growth doesn't come from accumulation, it comes from surrender. And that's what Nietzsche pointed out in describing the journey of becoming the Übermensch. You cannot be reborn until something within you has died. The hardest part of transformation is not learning new things, it's letting go of what once defined you, letting go of the thoughts you believed were right, letting go of behaviors that once made you loved, letting go of roles you clung to for identity. You'll feel lost, empty, like you're no one. And that's exactly right. In this in-between space, your old self is dissolving, and your new self hasn't fully formed. It's a neutral void, where you no longer belong to what was, and aren't yet ready for what's to come. But within that void, something miraculous begins to stir. Nietzsche called this the moment of creative destruction. When you dare to let limiting beliefs collapse, you clear space for a deeper self to emerge. But this process is anything but easy. It's like shedding old skin, peeling away every layer of ego you once mistook as you and facing your deepest fear. If I'm no longer who others recognize, who am I? That question won't offer a quick answer, but you must stay with it, because rebirth doesn't come by avoiding uncertainty. It comes by walking through it with courage. And every time you let go of something that's no longer true, you move closer to what actually belongs to you. This path isn't for those seeking safety. It's for those willing to lose everything just to find themselves. Because, as Nietzsche hinted, only when you are no one do you finally have a chance to become yourself. The higher you rise, the more you realize loneliness is inevitable. The hardest truth to accept in inner growth isn't the external challenges, it's the realization that the more you evolve, the more you walk alone. Not because you want to isolate yourself, but because few are ready to walk in the same direction. You start to see that the conversations you used to enjoy become hollow, the relationships you once clung to begin to fade, not because you've changed too quickly, but because most people remain where comfort and familiarity hold them back. Nietzsche lived this way. He was labeled mad, rejected by the academic world, and largely forgotten in his time. But it was in the silence of his isolation that he wrote his most profound ideas, ideas the world took decades to even begin to grasp. The absence of others didn't diminish him, it deepened him. You too must learn to face this. Loneliness is no longer the feeling of being left behind. It becomes the essential space in which you can shed everything false and preserve what is true. In loneliness, external noise fades, and you are forced to turn inward to finally hear the voice of your authentic self, the one you've long ignored. But this journey isn't easy. People will call you cold, distant, arrogant. They will try to pull you back into your old roles, not out of malice, but because your awakening forces them to confront their own inner laziness. And they don't want that feeling. The easiest way to avoid it is to make you feel guilty for moving forward. You must understand, loneliness is not the cost of living authentically. It is the condition that makes it possible. No one can enter the depths of their soul while still chained to others' expectations. And if you're brave enough to stay in that loneliness long enough, you'll discover something beautiful. It doesn't make you fragile, it makes you unshakable. When you live authentically, you become a threat to the old order. You don't need to do anything extreme or scream in protest. Simply living in truth makes you a thorn in the side of systems built on pretense. Inner honesty, when it's reflected in your actions and presence, immediately threatens social structures that operate on unspoken conformity. You'll no longer be called pleasant or likable. Instead, you'll be labeled strange, difficult, or even dangerous. Nietzsche understood this better than anyone. For him, society doesn't fear what is evil. It fears what is real, because the real is uncontrollable. It can't be defined, contained, or measured by social formulas, and a person living in truth is an unpredictable variable in society's stable equation. When you reject imitation, refuse pre-programmed values, and walk away from hollow praise, you silently dismantle an unspoken order, not through violence, but by existing. And that order, though unspoken, will do everything it can to pull you back into its mold. You'll notice it in awkward silences, joking remarks, subtle shifts in tone with people who once felt close. Your change isn't just personal, it becomes symbolic. You've become a mirror reflecting what others are avoiding in themselves, and they don't like what they see. So, living truthfully isn't safe. It's revolutionary, a courageous act in a world that runs on compromise and performance. But you don't need to apologize for being real. You don't need to shrink so others can feel taller, because when you stand firm in your essence, you don't just live for yourself, you become living proof that it's possible to be free without destruction, to be different without war, and that, in a world addicted to repetition, is the most profound revolution of all. The applause will stop, and you must learn to stand without it. We grow up in a world where reward is tied to recognition. Follow the rules, get praised, be agreeable, get loved, fit in, get celebrated over time. We become wired to seek that applause, approval, agreement, acceptance. But once you start living authentically, the first thing that disappears is applause. Nietzsche pointed out, the truly free individual won't be embraced by the crowd, not because they're doing wrong, but because they dare do what no one else does, live without needing approval. And the world doesn't know how to process that. The truth is, as you go deeper into your essence, you become invisible to many, no longer the charming, relatable, predictable version of yourself. You no longer fit into surface-level conversations or relationships based on pleasing others. You begin to exit the emotional space where most feel safe, and that quietly exiles you from the circle of applause. But this isn't loss, it's refinement. The clapping fades, to make room for silence. And in that silence, you must learn to stand not by being propped up by praise, but by the strength of your own inner alignment. This is one of life's hardest lessons. To do what's right without needing a stage, to hold your values without needing validation, to keep walking even when there are no cheers, no companions. True growth never happens as long as you need applause to keep going. Applause is something others can give and just as easily take away, but dignity, integrity, and loyalty to yourself, no one can take those unless you abandon them. When you learn to stand without an audience, you enter a deeper freedom where you no longer live to be celebrated, but to be real. And in that silence, you're no longer performing, you're alive. And the real never needs clapping, it only needs a direction and legs strong enough to keep walking. You'll lose a lot, but what you gain will be forever. On the journey back to your true self, the price you pay won't be small. It will cost you everything that once made you feel safe, familiar, and validated relationships you thought would last forever, roles you clung to as part of your identity, praise that once made you feel valuable. One by one, they fall away. Nietzsche never sugarcoated this path. He knew that awakening isn't a gift, it's a withdrawal from pretending, from societal expectations, from the shoulds and musts that once defined your life. You'll become quieter. Old connections will feel forced gatherings. That once brought joy may now feel hollow, but don't call this loss. What you're releasing is the inauthentic, and what you're gaining is something irreplaceable. You begin to see with clarity, not because the world outside has changed, but because the noise within has quieted. You no longer need to pretend you're okay. You no longer need to prove anything. Fear of being left behind no longer drives you. Instead, you move with a presence that is still but unshakable, as if you found ground that cannot collapse. That is wholeness, the rarest quality Nietzsche believed a modern soul could possess. Not everyone is willing to sacrifice to touch it, because the price of wholeness is to let go of all that was, built on borrowed ground. But if you go far enough, deep enough, you'll find that what you gain cannot be taken, replaced, or require approval because it is you. And once you touch that place, you won't need to hold on to much at all, because you have become the most unshakable thing within you. A soul no storm can reach, a mind no one can manipulate, a spirit no longer bound by the surface. That is the final reward, one only those willing to lose everything ever truly receive. You don't need to hide your pain to be seen as strong. In a society that glorifies toxic positivity, we're often taught to smile, even when we're breaking inside. We're told that strength means not showing emotion, always staying composed, never appearing weak. But Nietzsche, who faced profound loneliness, illness, and mental anguish, believed otherwise. True strength doesn't lie in being untouched by pain, but in walking through it without abandoning yourself. You don't need to pretend you're fine. You don't need to hide your tears or mask your wounds as if they're shameful. Pain doesn't diminish your worth. It simply means you still feel. You're still alive in your truth. And sometimes, healing begins the moment you admit, I'm tired, I'm hurting, but I'm still here. No running, no blaming, no pretending to be stronger than you are. That's the deepest kind of resilience, not forged from armor, but from an honest heart. Remember, you don't need to be perfect to deserve healing. You only need to be honest with yourself. And from that honesty, a new kind of strength is born, not the kind that fights the world, but the kind that gently carries you back home to your whole self. The more you understand others, the less they can hurt you. One of the clearest signs of inner growth isn't that you feel less pain. It's that you better understand why others behave the way they do, and why their actions no longer wound you as deeply. When you can see the fear beneath someone's anger, the scarcity behind their control, or the unhealed pain behind their criticism, you start to understand that most negative reactions aren't about you. They're projections of what's unresolved in them. Nietzsche once warned about the destructive power of the collective, where people attack what is different because they're too afraid to face themselves. But instead of resenting them, you can choose understanding, not to excuse, but to free yourself from the victim narrative. When you understand others, you no longer need to react to every word. You don't get caught in every emotional current. You learn to stand firm without defensiveness, to be present without shrinking, and from that place, you not only protect yourself better, you become a place of peace for others. Compassion doesn't make you weak. On the contrary, it's the quietest form of strength, a power that doesn't seek to conquer, only to remain unshaken and in a reactive world. That kind of strength is a rare form of freedom. The meaning of life is not something you find. It's something you quietly give yourself each day. We often imagine the meaning of life as something grand, a noble mission, a shining goal, or a lifelong ideal we must chase. But Nietzsche, in his deep dive into the human condition, showed us that life's meaning doesn't come from the outside. It is shaped by how you live each moment. There is no pre-written map that will lead you to the true purpose. And if you keep searching for it in others, in religion, in ideals, you will always feel empty, because meaning isn't something handed to you. It's something you quietly build through presence, choice, and honesty with yourself each day. When you dare to live by what you believe, even in small ways, when you do the right thing with no witness, when you offer kindness without seeking praise, you are giving your life meaning, no validation required, no spotlight needed. Nietzsche called this the creative power of the individual, the ability to redefine one's own existence, independent of the crowd's expectations. And it is this conscious living, repeated in the quiet rhythm of daily life, that makes a person extraordinary. The meaning of life isn't far away. It lives in how you choose to live today. And as long as you're choosing consciously, even in a chaotic world, you are writing a life worth living. The terrifying freedom, and the one worth living for in the end. The journey toward a strong mind isn't about becoming invincible to the world. It's about no longer being conquered by your own inner fears, not afraid of being misunderstood, not afraid of being left behind, not afraid of living a life unlike anyone else. You don't need to become great. You just need to become real and to dare live that truth to its fullest. Because in that truth is freedom, and in that freedom is meaning, and in that meaning is a life of depth, integrity, and quiet beauty, even without applause, even without company. Nietzsche didn't write to be admired. He wrote to awaken not the crowd, but the deepest part of you, the part that's been silent for far too long. And if you feel something stirring in you as you read this journey, don't stop here. Keep walking, not to be perfect, only to be true. And that is how you make life meaningful, not through what you say, but through the person you choose to become.